Hello, people of the internet, and welcome to episode 16 of Fully Endorsed. I am Andres Perez, aka Kaij Noir, and here with me, as always, is my trustworthy co-pilot, Mr. Dillion McCandless, aka Super DM64.
I don't know how trustworthy I would be as a co-pilot, but I'm happy to be here nonetheless.
Right. So for today's,
I'm like Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, where you're like, do you even know how to fly that plane, or are you just sitting there pushing levers?
There's just blinkings and flashings and blinkings and buttons and bleeping and blinking. I can't stand
the
it
lights.
anymore, Dylan.
Oh God, the lights.
And they're beeping and blinking. But anyways, trustworthy, whether or not you are a trustworthy individual for piloting, I would say you are most certainly trustworthy when it comes to podcasting and reviewing movies and that we recommend to each other. And speaking of recommendations, today's subject, we are covering the 1972 Mexican luchador horror film Las Momias de Guanajuato, or The Mummies of Guanajuato, which is considered to this day to be kind of one of the greatest, if not the greatest and most iconic of a rather interesting subgenre of film, being the lucha horror films that were very prevalent from the 60s and 70s, from the 50s all the way to the 60s and 70s, throughout the 70s. And so,
interesting. A couple episodes ago we covered Enter the Dragon, and that's the movie that everybody, even if you don't know any kung fu movies, you've never seen one in your life, everybody knows Enter the Dragon. Mm-hmm. And from what you've told me, it seems like this is that for fans of Mexican luchador horror, which is apparently a genre.
Yeah. So wrestling in Mexico goes back all the way roughly around the time of 1863, but it wasn't until the early 1900s where professional wrestling was fully established, specifically in 1933. It wouldn't be until the 1950s where lucha libre would eventually grow to become a mainstream aspect of Mexican culture as a whole. And so, throughout it wasn't until around the 40s and 50s where a lot of luchadors, or masked wrestlers, would become household names. And the most famous of these luchadors would be El Santo, who first stepped into the ring in 1942. And by the time he sort of became a thing, we had other masked wrestlers, and by the 50s, we ended up having a series of movies made to sort of focus around these sort of larger-than-life characters. Kind of similar to what we sort of did in the 80s and 90s, where we sort of took wrestlers like Hulk Hogan and The Rock to John Cena and brought them into the world of cinema. So I'm very curious.
Although they're not playing themselves or their wrestling persona usually in those movies.
That is very true, yeah.
Whereas what you're describing is more in a weird way, it's almost like the fucking those fucking YouTuber lore movies.
Oh my god, you're right. Yeah, holy shit. Yeah, it's
you have the main series, which is the wrestling matches, and then you have these weird narrative experiments where houses fly into space and mummies come to life.
Oh my god, it's so horrible, but it's such an adept thing. Yeah, where you establish a persona elsewhere, and then you bring that persona onto the big screen. Whether it's Nostalgia Critic or fucking Fred or El Santo.
Yeah, maybe a slightly more highbrow version of that is some of the shit that Kevin Smith does these days. I don't know if you've seen. Did I say? Wait, yeah, Kevin Smith. Have you seen? I don't know if you've seen the new Jay and Silent Bob movie that came out last year, but Kevin Smith both plays Silent Bob and also himself in that movie.
Oh, that's pretty surreal. I have yet to see Jay and Silent Bob reboot.
Yeah, it's not as good as Strikes Back, but it's a fun. You'll get some nostalgia out of it,
Okay, yeah, that sounds good. Let's see. So, one of the first, if not the first, lucha libre, luchador movie would be 1952's The Man in the Silver Mask, which, despite the name, did not feature El Santo, even though it was kind of written to be an El Santo movie. And El Santo didn't get into the movie because he thought it would be like a waste of time. It's like, lucha movies, they'll never happen. They'll never take off the ground. Although ironically, when the luchador movie phenomenon exploded, it wasn't until 1958 where El Santo did enter got into movies with El Cerebro del Mal and Hombres Infernales, which is The Evil Brain and The Infernal Men. And throughout the 60s, I believe 3 of these movies, these luchador movies, were eventually dubbed into English, one of which was actually featured on Mystery Science Theater 3000. And let's see, which one was it? Was called Santo versus the Vampire Women from 1962. Although I haven't actually seen that episode of MST3K, though I really want to. And let's see, funny enough, Santo was actually renamed to Samson, I guess, to appeal to American sensibilities, I guess.
Right. Well, it's like you translate his name into English, and it's like
the Saint.
And it's like yeah, it's not really it doesn't work. It doesn't have the same punch in English,
I suppose so, yeah.
Whereas Samson, it's similar enough to Santo in terms of the letters,
but no, for any Mexican, that's blasphemy, Dylan.
I understand. I'm just saying, trying to explain my culture a little bit.
Sure.
It's like, it's an easy reference. People, know the story of Samson, and they equate that name with strength. Right. It would be the same as if they had called him, like Hercules or honey, you mean Huncules. Or, I don't know, something like that. It's just a reference that people can glob onto, whereas, they could have just called him Santo. That's the thing. But I guess in their brains at the time, that wouldn't fly in America.
Right. So when it comes to luchador movies, the craze ended from like the mid to late 70s. So given that this was like the movie that we're covering today is from 1972, this was like near the peak. No, like not near the peak. This was like around roughly like the peak of luchador movies, where it's like shortly after this moment, things were going to start to decline later on. And a lot of people like to say that 1977's Mystery in Bermuda was considered like the final hurrah and like the official end to the luchador movies. Mystery in Bermuda also happened to be the second movie to feature the 3 most iconic wrestlers, Mil Máscaras, El Santo, and Blue Demon, the 3 of which they appeared for the very first time in this movie, Las Momias de Guanajuato. So it's like Las Momias de Guanajuato was kind of considered like, despite the numerous wrestler team-ups from all the previous movies prior and since, this movie in particular was essentially like the Avengers of luchador movies, because you got the big 3 together for the very first time in cinema history.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so, like, pretty much after 1977, the luchador film sort of, went away, as all trends do, come and go. And it wasn't until, though I was surprised to learn that it was brought back in 2007 by Mil Máscaras, who is still wrestling to this very day, whereas unfortunately, El Santo and Blue Demon have since passed away.
He's got to be like the Mexican Ric Flair, because like he's got to be in his fucking 80s and he's still fucking going.
So actually, yeah, Mil Máscaras, he was born in 1942, whereas Blue Demon was born in 1922 and El Santo born in 1917. So he was definitely like a lot younger than these guys. He's probably got like a good roughly 20 years. Both El Santo and Blue Demon have like 20 years on Mil Máscaras. Today, Mil Máscaras is 78 years old. So, yeah, he's definitely getting up. He's getting up there in age. I'm not sure how old.
17. That's crazy. Wow.
Yeah, that was Santo's age.
That's over 100 years ago now. That's like.
Yeah. I never
like in America. Thought about that. In America, if you were born in 1917, that means that like your dad probably fought in the Civil War. Like,
I guess so.
Or your grandpa or an older uncle. You've got family who fought in the Civil War. Living family.
I suppose you're right. But yeah, for Mil Máscaras, he ended up bringing back the sort of resurgence of wrestling movies with a trilogy of films. 2007 brought Mil Máscaras versus the Aztec Mummy, which brought over several other newer, younger wrestlers at the time. In 2008, there was the sequel Academy of Doom, and recently in 2015, there was the last movie, Aztec Revenge. So it was a big...
So
sorry.
It only stopped very recently. Interesting.
Yeah. So outside of this brief resurgence, the only other example I could think of like wrestling movies would probably be like The Haunted World of El Superbeasto by Rob Zombie, which was sort of like an animated spoof of that sort of genre where, you know, it features a whole variety of horror pop culture references with a wrestler in like a Mexican wrestler in the middle of it all, trying to as like a crime fighter, although it's a parody, so it's like this guy is portrayed as sort of like a doofus, an idiot, while his kick-ass stepsister takes does the majority of the ass kicking.
Let us not forget Nacho Libre, which
it's difficult to consider that a wrestling movie because it's like it's more of a drama than it is like an action drama, more than it is just like a straight up like campy action movie. So, like,
yeah,
it feels...
I think it's responsible for teaching a lot of people our age, like white people our age, what luchadors are, though, you know?
Really? Because I would say, like...
the same way that, like,
yeah.
you know, Samurai Jack learned me what a samurai was. I had never heard of a samurai before that.
I guess so, although I would argue that haven't there been like several masked wrestlers in the WWE, like the most popular most likely being like Rey Mysterio, who by the way came from my hometown.
Yeah, there are, and he was for a long time the only one. Now I think there's a few more. I remember when like the second guy came over, his name was like Sin Cara or something like that, which means without Cara, whatever that is. He was like the second one that I remember seeing after Rey Mysterio, and that was like a big deal. Like, oh, there's two of them now, and now I think there's
like two of them. This is getting out of hand.
Mr. McMahon's like wiped about all of them.
Oh, by the way,
Triple H is like, is that legal? I will make it legal.
Execute Order 66. By the way, Sin Cara is without face or faceless.
Oh, that makes sense, because his mask doesn't even have like eye holes or like a mouth hole or anything.
Right. And let's see. Also, funny enough, Mil Máscaras is actually the very first, like, again, one of the first, if not the very first Mexican wrestler to actually cross over into mainstream American wrestling. And he was also one of the very first luchadors, again, if not the first, to cross over into Japanese wrestling as well.
Yeah, the thing about it, though, I don't think there are any luchadors who have crossed over now who are like big dudes, because Rey Mysterio and Sin Cara are both like really small, you know, like if you were a wrestler, like they, like
yeah.
You know,
well, that's the thing about us Mexicans, we are not very large people in general, and so
sure on average, but you know, there's some big guys. Yeah. All three of the main guys in this movie are big, beefy, fucking, you know, Bane-looking motherfuckers.
Yeah. Well, I would say that in comparison to Blue Demon and El Santo, Mil Máscaras was considered like the biggest dude, and he was classified as a heavyweight wrestler. So he was like the most popular dude amongst the heavyweight division. So
and you can tell in their scenes together, he is like so much taller than everybody.
Right? He is a Mexican among Mexican. Right, and so going into this movie here, what were like so I know that you had like no clue that this sort of like horror genre, this like horror luchador genre of films existed. So what were your thoughts going into this?
Yeah. See, this has been quite the education for me. Most of what I knew about lucha came from Mucha Lucha.
Right, which itself, of course, was like Mucha Lucha, El Tigre, those kind of the stuff was like clearly like a sort of like a love letter to this sort of aspect of Mexican culture.
Yeah, I forgot about El Tigre. That's not one that I ever watched, but I used to see
unfortunately, that was past my time. I was in high school, I think, when that came out.
Yeah, and Mucha Lucha isn't exactly accurate.
Right.
I remember when we were watching this movie.
For a show not made by non-Mexicans, they did a pretty decent job.
we watched this movie, and I was like, Andres, why doesn't Blue Lemon just turn into a giant shoe and smash the mummy? That's what the characters from Mucha Lucha would do. The little red kid and the flea,
Ricochet, the flea, and Buena Girl.
Was that the names? Okay,
those were their names. Yeah, Ricochet. Because remember Ricochet because he's a pinball.
Oh yeah. So yeah, I knew very little to nothing about luchas. I knew that they existed.
Yeah.
Like I said, I had seen some of them in American wrestling, but I've never been like a big American wrestling guy. I have family who's really into it, and so I've seen things.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I didn't know a whole lot about that world, but I do know horror, and so.
Yeah, you were definitely like taken aback when I told you it's like there was like strong connections between luchadors and horror.
Yeah, I was like, I've never heard of this before in my life.
That's the thing with Mexicans. I like to think that like us Mexicans were a very superstitious people, and so
you don't really think of horror films as like coming from Mexico. When you think of like foreign horror films, you usually go to like the Italians or German expressionism, or something like that.
J horror.
Yeah, J horror. You never think of Mexico, but apparently y'all got your own thing going on.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, we're not only like within Mexican culture, like superstition is very big, but also at the same time, Mexicans in general are highly religious people. So it makes sense that like to make movies based on our culture, it would kind of make sense to make like supernatural, demonic entities the main antagonist for which these luchadors would then battle for supremacy, battle for the fate of humanity. So for a lot of these people, or it's not just like supernatural, like for a lot of these movies, you end up having wrestlers going up against terrorists, going up against vampires and demons and maybe I've already mentioned terrorists, alien invaders, or in this case, mummies brought back through the powers of Satan. So
did we mention terrorists?
You mentioned terrorists, yes, because those are the cheapest to pull off. And I guess I wouldn't be surprised if like these sort of movies were what eventually convinced those individuals in Turkey to make that like what's it called, Three Mighty Men, or like Three Devadam, the movie that featured like bootleg Santo and bootleg Captain America teaming up against the evil bootleg Spider-Man.
Oh yeah. Man, the Turks they're an interesting people, cinematically.
Yeah. So, like, if they thought, like, stuff like, not Power Rangers, if they thought stuff like Star Wars was good enough to make rip-offs, like, what was it, Superman and Batman and Star Wars, I guess they also eventually thought that Marvel Comics and luchadors were good enough to capitalize and rip off as well.
What haven't they ripped off, though? There's Turkish Rambo, there's Turkish everything.
Yeah, Turkish Delights. Turkish Delights.
Turkish Delight, Turkish prisons, Turkish baths. They've got everything over there.
Right. So I'm not sure.
Turkish Star Wars.
Yeah. I'm not sure how like popular American wrestlers are in comparison to Mexican wrestlers, but like for Mexican wrestlers, they're kind of seen as like local heroes, as like icons in their own right. They're sort of like seen as like these sort of mystic, like mythical, larger than life like personalities, especially since for a lot of these luchadors, most of them never gave away their real names, or if we do know their real names at least, such as the case for our three main leads here, we never saw any of their faces in real life to this very day, with the exception of Santo, who revealed a little bit of his face on a talk show just weeks before he eventually died of a heart attack.
Yeah, I think here in America, as far as American wrestling goes, I think the peak was definitely in the 80s and the 90s.
Mm-hmm.
With the Hulkamania is coming at you, brother, and then fucking the Attitude Era and all that stuff. That's really when American wrestling was at its peak of popularity. Now it's still very popular. A lot of people are into it. We know people who are very into it.
Oh yeah.
But it's more niche now, and it's not as good, I don't think, honestly. For one thing, they went all PG-13 to try and improve their ratings. And I don't know. When I was a kid, I remember wrestling being way more hardcore than it comes off as now. It comes off very sort of polished and shiny.
Mm.
And I'm like, no, it's about like dudes with long hair and like leather shit all over them fucking slamming into each other and fucking trying to murder each other. That's what wrestling is.
Right. And as for like my own personal history with lucha libre, there was a time in my life. It was around like I want to say middle school where I got my dad got me heavily into lucha libre, and I ended up like started collecting masks for like Blue Demon, Santo, Rey Mysterio, and Mil Máscaras, and I even went to one lucha libre event that took place in Tijuana, Mexico, where I got to see. I believe it was Super Parka, who was like a skeleton dude. I saw, I think it was Rey Mysterio Senior, who I believe was Rey Mysterio's uncle. And I also saw the matchup between like.
Yeah, I always forget his full name is Rey Mysterio Jr. Right?
I believe so. Yeah. And so there was like one of the big event was El Hijo del Santo and El Hijo del Blue Demon. So, or rather, Blue Demon Jr. So we have like the son of Blue Demon and the son of Santo going up against each other, sort of carrying on their father's rivalry, along with like a third dude. And so I believe it was like a match where it's like the loser would end up having to take off their mask, and it ended up becoming like a draw, I believe. And so, or rather, I think what happened was the third dude ended up beating one of them, and then the last guy beated him. So it's like I think it was like Santo who was telling Blue Demon, it's like, hey, I won, so you got to take off your mask. But then Blue Demon Jr. was like, hey, you did not beat me. This other guy beat me, so technically I don't got to take off my mask. So na boo boo, stick your head in doo doo.
Yes. This is actual dialogue. Very
accurately translated.
Very mature, those luchadors.
I may have gotten the result of the fight wrong because this was so long ago, but it was a really amazing experience to be in there. I wasn't like super up close to the ring. I was probably in like one of the mid row seats. But that was my.
I bet it's exciting to see in person. I mean, because lucha libre is also not as fake as what I like to call wrestling.
Yeah. In fact, while I was doing my research, I learned that Mil Máscaras has received criticism for his unwillingness to pretend that moves are executed well when the U.S. wrestler accidentally like fumbles a move. And he has been. I'm just reading a quote from him. He has stated the following in 2012. In response to the criticism he had garnered over the years. One problem is that in the US, some wrestlers focus more on their image than their skills. I understand because I understand the business. I don't criticize them for that, but they should understand that for me, wrestling means something more. If a guy doesn't execute a move, I don't pretend that he did. If I miss a move, then I don't ask anyone to make me look good. So,
there's more of an emphasis in American wrestling to give them a good show. I think there's more of an emphasis on like, let's make this look as good as we can. And unfortunately, oftentimes when it's not done well, it comes across as just the fakest shit you ever seen in your life. Especially, oh god, I saw part of this year's WrestleMania, which was hilarious because I don't know if they're still doing this, but they had no audience. Because of due to coronavirus.
Okay.
Yeah, due to coronavirus. And it was fucking I never realized how much you need an audience there to make it more exciting.
Right.
Because without all that like background noise of like people cheering and booing, it sounds like a really boring tennis game. It's a whole lot of like ugh. Like a whole lot of that.
Oh yeah. Oh, by the way, yeah, in Mexican wrestling there is quite a lot of slapping going on. Slaps across the chest.
Yeah, and then they were doing like gestures to the audience, and I'm like, "There's no audience."
they might as well do what like that one baseball stadium in Korea did, and just prop up a bunch of sex dolls around the arena.
Yeah, it's like you can't do your normal shtick. There's nobody there to play off of.
Right. Oh god, I can only imagine what Lucha Libre must be going through during this time as well.
Yeah. Who knows?
Oh yeah, by the way, so not only has like Lucha Libre inspired the likes of El Tigre and Mucha Lucha, but there's also the luchadors have also been appeared in comics. There was actually an El Santo animated series on Mexican Cartoon Network, which was a series of a single.
Wait. Mexico has its own Cartoon Network.
Yeah, I mean, heck, even I believe Japan has its own Cartoon Network as well. They just air like a different set of cartoons. Like, for instance, I believe Japanese Cartoon Network airs the Fairly Odd Parents because there's no Nickelodeon here. Yeah.
What the fuck?
Yeah. Oh no, maybe not the Fairly Odd Parents. I think
they still play like American cartoons. Like I just figured Japanese Cartoon Network would just be it would just be Toonami all day every day. Which sounds great. Make Toonami its own channel. You fucking cowards. Ted Turner, fucking.
I think actually, like, I may be wrong. Maybe it's not Fairly Odd Parents. I believe it's SpongeBob that's on Japanese Cartoon Network.
Oh, poor Japanese.
Oh no, they love SpongeBob, but not as much as Minions, I think. Yeah. So
I wasn't sure if they would understand the SpongeBob humor. It's very
slapstick. It's very physical, I'd say.
Yeah, a lot of it is, especially these days. Yeah, you're probably.
So El Santo even had his own animated series, which was like a series of like 5 2-minute long two-minute long episodes, and I believe you can see some of them on YouTube. But also, El Santo even had a cameo in the Batman 66 comic that featured the 66 incarnation of Bane, who was, of course, a luchador himself.
Of course!
Buenos dias, Batman!
It is I, Blue Lemon. Bane.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, Blue Demon's mask does look a little bit similar to certain designs, certain incarnations of Bane in the past.
Are you kidding? If you changed his color from blue to black, he would just be animated series Bane. Like, it's very... Somebody on staff was a fan. I don't know if it was Bruce Timm or somebody else, but somebody knew things about Mexican wrestling.
Right. So, going back to the world of luchador films themselves, I actually had several of them on VHS back in the day. This was during at like the height or the peak of my obsession with lucha libre, and because my Spanish wasn't that good and still isn't that good today, just because I'm a very lazy individual when it comes to my Spanish. Yo soy muy perezoso con mi español. But I did get to watch it alongside my parents, and my parents would give me like the cliff notes to what was going on. And did
you have a VHS copy of Las Momias de Guanajuato?
Yes, I did, and I always remembered how weird the cover was, because the cover seemed to have been like a repurposed art from like one of the Universal Mummy movies, because it featured like an actual bandaged up Egyptian mummy choking out a woman, even though the mummies in this movie don't look anything like that. But on top of that, it was also not only my introduction to, like, this. Not only was it my favorite among these wrestling movies, but it was also my introduction to the real-life Mummies of Guanajuato, where it also has a very interesting and unique history that is a huge tourist location in the real-life city that this movie takes place in. So I took some notes about the mummies of the real life mummies of Guanajuato, where apparently. By
the way, I found the VHS cover that you were talking about.
Mm-hmm.
That is definitely one of the Universal Mummy movies. It looks a lot like Karas, which is the mummy from all of the because Imhotep, the original mummy that Boris Karloff played, dies at the end of that movie. Right. And so in all the other mummy movies, they have this other mummy named Karas, who was originally played by Lon Chaney Jr., but would wound up being played by multiple people.
Right.
And it looks like that mummy to me.
Okay. Yeah. So the real life mummies were situated, of course, in the city of Guanajuato. And they were most likely individuals who passed away due to a cholera pandemic from 1829 to 1951. And it was around this time where more cemeteries were being opened, and it was, having burials was kind of like a lucrative business in the city of Guanajuato. And during this time, there was a burial tax between 1870 and 1958, where you have to pay a constant tax in order to keep the bodies buried. And so if
Ain't that just the way? Can't afford to live, can't afford to die.
Right.
Okay.
So, like, for those individuals for those families who were unable to pay to keep their family members buried, their bodies would just be taken out of the burial grounds, and as a result of being kept in storage, their bodies were naturally mummified due to the sort of perfect weather conditions within Guanajuato. And eventually that's...
You're being evicted. Get out of here, you lazy bum.
Yeah. And so the storage place was eventually turned into a museum called El Museo de las Momias in 1969, and I believe 59 out of 111 mummies are currently under display. And for those of you who might be thinking that's so
fucked up.
I was about to get into that.
The first time you told me this story, I don't think I really grasped what you were saying to me.
Yeah.
But now that I hear it again, this it's so fun. Because like ancient Egyptian mummies, it was like, oh, this was their religious belief. Like this was like what they had to do so that they could live on in the afterlife, and it's very sort of spiritual for them. Right. And in your case, it's like fucking.
Get out, you lazy bum.
You're evicted.
And like for those of you who think it's really fucked up to take like a dead person's body, a deceased individual's corpse, and put it up on display for the world to see is kind of disrespectful. That's sort of like it's an interesting distinction between West, like a lot of like American culture and Mexican culture. Whereas I believe in America, correct me if I'm wrong, Dylan, but we often have a lot of like reverence for the bodies of the dead, and we tend to treat them with as much respect as when they were alive, when those individuals were alive. Would I be correct to assume so?
Yeah, there's like graveyard etiquette. You're not supposed to like walk directly on a grave.
Mm-hmm.
You're supposed to walk in the rows, and stuff like that. Yeah. There's a lot of stuff like that.
Yeah, but
how much you adhere to that, it varies from person to person, obviously. But yeah, right. That is certainly part of the culture.
But when it comes to Mexican culture, as far as I'm aware, Mexicans, once you've died, that body is no longer representative of the person who was alive. So, like, for a lot of people, they have this mentality where it's like, when I die, I don't really honestly care what you do with my body. Once I'm dead, I'm dead. So most Mexicans tend to view that body as no longer being that person who was alive. That's no longer their loved one. Their loved one is gone to heaven or gone to the afterlife. That body is just a prop now, essentially. So
yeah, that's how the Klingons are in Star Trek. There's an episode where a Klingon officer dies on board the Enterprise, and then Picard asks their captain, like, what do we do with the body? Do you want the body or whatever? And he's like, dispose of it however you wish. And then he just sort of walks out.
Right. And of course, I cannot speak on behalf of all Mexicans out there. That'd be ludicrous. But, for my personal experiences, my family has always been more like following the American mentality of treating the passing of a loved one with more reverence and sadness. That's another thing. Like, I think...
Well, your culture does have a lot of like reverence for the dead, but it's
right.
It's in more of like a
celebratory style, I'd say, right?
It's in more of like an Eastern sort of like spiritual sense, where it's like it's the soul of the dead person that you have the reverence for.
Right, exactly, yeah.
It's like, oh, the ancestors are watching us, or whatever, like that's sort of.
Right.
I've seen the trailer. I've seen the trailer for Coco.
You should watch Coco. We should bring up Coco in Fully Endorsed if you haven't seen it. I fucking love that movie. Which, by the way, absolutely. El Santo has a cameo in The Land of the Dead in Coco.
Oh, really? That's really cool. Yeah, we can watch that at some point. I'd be game.
Yeah. So, but when it came to my family personally, we've always been like, I guess, more influenced by American culture and American sensibilities when it comes to the subject of death, which could very well be different from how traditional Mexicans tend to traditionally view the concept of death. But it's definitely always been a fascinating aspect of the culture to look into. So for anybody who I remember there's this YouTuber who had made a video going into the museum, and she sort of had like she got super emotional over the sort of fucked upness of displaying these bodies, especially like women, men, and even children and infants. And
it's
like,
not so much the displaying of the bodies that I find fucked up. It's the backstory.
Yeah,
about the
right.
Fucking charging rent for graves.
Right. But like, well,
that's the fucked up part as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. But I found it very interesting to see it like from listening to like an American's perspective on this sort of on the mummies of Guanajuato, and then looking into the comments and seeing people naturally explaining, hey, we respect how you feel. This is just how we normally view things. And she also was respectful of their input and feedback.
I mean, for what you've described, it sounds like, interestingly enough, it's like the exact opposite of how the ancient Egyptians viewed death and why they mummified people. It was all about like, you know, there's still a connection between the soul and the body, and we need to preserve the body so that the king can live on in the afterlife or whatever. And like, you put them in the pyramid, and like that's like literally their house. Like they're going to live in that pyramid for all eternity. The mummy's going to get up and walk around like.
Right. You know? Yeah. Meanwhile, with the Mexican mummies, it's like they don't care of the body, so they just naturally mummified.
They stored them in a shed, and they got all dry, and they fucking put them out on display.
Right.
You stored your dead the way that like Toho stored old Godzilla suits.
Oh God, you're right. Bring out your dead. Ding.
Bring out your dead.
They're literally bringing out the dead.
Go and see the violence inherent in the system.
So I think it was a genius idea to bring out to utilize the mummies of Guanajuato as like the sort of premise to bring these wrestlers together. So the basic story of this is that 100 years ago, El Santo's descendant, who is also conveniently named El Santo, beat a masked wrestler by the name of Satan. And Satan, he used the unholy powers of the underworld to get revenge on El Santo's lineage like 100 years later. And so 100 years later, Satan and his followers were mummified, but conveniently, only their faces were shriveled up and all dried up husks. Meanwhile, the rest of their bodies were mysteriously perfectly preserved, which I believe was just their means of explaining why they couldn't afford to get proper makeup for the rest of their bodies.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that, though. I wonder if that kind of inspired a little bit of that thing in the Brendan Fraser version of the Mummy, when they find Imhotep and they're like, is he supposed to look like that? And she goes, I've never seen a mummy who looks like this. He's still juicy, you know.
Who knows, maybe. And so it just so happened that like once the events of the movie began, we are introduced to a little person by the name of Pinguino. And Pinguino, he hosts a tour, a routine tour through the museum. And he's like, you know what? It just so happens that it's now officially 100 years since Satan lost his match to El Santo, and we just so happen to be having a wrestling event in the city very soon. And so, because due to all of this, you know, convenience, Satan is resurrected.
I like that scene is right at the beginning of the movie.
Yeah.
Because it almost feels self-aware about like, hey, this is a lot of convenient shit that's all happening at the same time.
Yeah. Oh, so not only is it 100 years since he lost, not only is there going to be a wrestling event in the city soon, but also El Santo is also just so happens to be showing up to this particular wrestling event.
Right. So it's like, we know that this is fucking crazy. We're just going to get it out of the way.
Right. This movie kind of operates under its own sense of logic.
Yeah.
And so, Satan and his followers come back to life. They start strangling people. Eventually, Pinguino, he sees the mummies. Nobody believes him. So he talks to his friend, who's a nightclub lounge singer. And she happens to know, I believe she's the girlfriend of Mil Máscaras. And so, because also Mil Máscaras and Blue Demon happen to be in town, and they happen to know Pinguino and the girl, then they end up getting involved and try to fight the demons. And eventually, El Santo shows up at the last minute to help out these dudes.
Yeah. With tiny flamethrowers.
Yeah, that's the thing. They use flamethrower guns to burn these mummies to a crisp.
They look like Flash Gordon, like laser pistols.
Or they look like Ultraman, like Science Patrol guns.
Yeah, like that gun that Dr. Serizawa pulls out of his ass in the last episode to kill Zeton.
Right. It's such a ridiculous Deus Ex Machina, like anticlimactic move, and I love it just for how ludicrous it is.
It is. It's fucking crazy.
Because they're just wrestling and just slapping and beating the shit out of these mummies, but they keep coming back. It's like, fuck, what are we supposed to do? Usually punching my way out of things usually works. And then that's when I believe it was like Santo or like Santo's like assistant. I'm not sure if that assistant was ever appeared in like other Santo movies because I haven't watched enough to know. But it's really funny that he's like, oh, by the way, here are some flamethrowers I have in the back of the car.
Yeah. Well, it makes a lot of sense though, and I'm surprised that I haven't seen this more often. If you were gonna if you had to fight a mummy in real life,
yeah.
Fire would be the way to go. They're a desiccated corpse,
right. They're already dried up. They're practically made out of wood at that point.
I mean, yeah. I believe there are examples in history where mummies have been used as firewood, so it's completely possible.
Right. Let's see. And so the movie I feel like moves at a very enjoyable and brisk pace. It's very much like very typical of your B-movie monster on the loose sort of movie. There's like there's a mystery. The stakes are constantly escalating. You have a very limited amount of characters who are fully aware of what's going on until all mayhem ensues for the final act, for the third act. There is like a running plot line as well where there's like this inspector, I'm just going to call him Mexican Commissioner Gordon, and he's like, something's up with these murders. We're going to get to the bottom of it. And eventually that leads to the mummies stealing Blue Demon's clothes, masquerading as him, and framing him for the murders just to get the police off their tail. So, something tells me that was a little bit of padding, but again, it's the ridiculousness of mummies framing a luchador for murder that just adds to the charm of this movie.
I think you're right. I think it is padding, because it comes like in the middle of the movie, like right out of nowhere, and it doesn't really add up to much.
No. Like there's a short
like chase scene after that where the police are chasing after the real Blue Demon.
Yeah.
But post that, it really doesn't. There's really not much to that whole plot point. You know what this movie reminds me a lot of? I've been trying to think of something to compare it to.
What?
This is similar to like a Gamera versus Zebra, I think. You know what I mean? Like it's a really zany, like weird movie that's like out there and is like, made by a different culture.
Right.
But it's like a lot of fun,
Oh, absolutely, dude. Yeah. I mean, does it make sense? Fuck no. Do I care? No. Equally, fuck no. Of course not.
Right. See, I think Gamera versus Zebra is a pretty good point of comparison. Not a Guiron. Guiron is on a slightly higher level, but a nice Zebra.
Yeah. I would say it's not as boring as Zebra, because for me, that movie does take its sweet ass time at advertising Japan SeaWorld.
Yeah, that's true.
Although, to be fair, this movie
the Japanese don't pad; they drag. It's a different way of eating.
They don't. I love that. I want that on a shirt or a poster. They don't pad; they drag.
Yeah, it's a different way of increasing the runtime of your film.
Right. Let's remember that chase scene with the girl and that alien girl in the bikini disguise, just chasing them all over that park. But
that is some Scooby-Doo shit, that scene.
Oh yeah. Oh, I would say, you know what, this honestly does, I do get some like legit Scooby-Doo vibes from this movie as well, given that you got Blue Demon and Mil Máscaras for the most part, along with their kid sidekick, their little person sidekick, their female sidekicks, all like sort of solving the mystery behind these murders and mummy murders.
I mean, Scooby-Doo and the Mummies of Guanajuato, I'd watch it.
Yes! Oh my god, why hasn't this been a thing outside of the WWE shit?
Ugh. They've made like 20 of these fucking Scooby-Doo movies now, and only the first 4 were good.
That's so true. Even their Scooby-Doo and the Monster of Mexico, that Chupacabra, that is not what a Chupacabra is supposed to look like.
Well, there's two versions of Chupacabra, isn't there? There's there's like the version that I grew up knowing from that one episode of Dexter's Lab, where it's like this weird looking demon thing.
Yes.
And then there's the Chupacabra who's like
the hairless dog.
Basically a big chihuahua.
It's essentially like a dog or a coyote with mange.
It's a Chupahuahua.
Oh no! Ay Dios mío! He's barking, he's shaking fast, more furiously than ever, way.
Jose, that's what I wanted to tell you. A Chupacabra. He back and gone. Now he told me.
Where the hell is our flamethrowers, ese? We got to take care of this Chupahuahua.
Chupahuahua.
No, you know what? That's the thing. We gotta make this a thing now. We gotta make like our own wrestling character, or we gotta get We gotta get like the new character that we created and have him go up against like. We gotta get like the Star Slinger contra el Chupahuahua.
The Chupahuahua. Yeah, I remember the first time I saw the Chupahuahua version of the Chupacabra. It was in this terrible sci-fi channel movie, sci-fi, excuse me, where Eric Estrada was at the Alamo for some reason, and they were fighting Chupacabras. And it was fucking terrible. It was fucking terrible.
You know what? If we made a movie, it'd probably be just as bad, maybe. But
you could probably also get Eric Estrada.
Yeah.
There he is.
There he is. That Chupahuahua kicks in Cool Cat's face.
Oh, the movie was literally called Chupacabra versus the Alamo. And it is fucking horseshit.
Because that sounds like a decent concept.
Right. Give that concept to like, what's his name? That director made Spy Kids.
Robert Rodriguez.
Robert Rodriguez. Yeah. And he can make something cool out of that. But
how come he hasn't made a modern day Chupacabra, Lucha Libre horror movie? That would be perfect. Right? Don't let Rob Zombie do it.
He should team up with Guillermo del Toro.
Yes. Oh my god. And they're like, with our powers combined. And then they should like get Mascaras involved since he's still doing these movies.
Yeah, it's like, Del Toro, you handle the creatures and I'll handle the out there Mexican shit.
He's like, you got it, Robert. I will do my best to make the best monsters in all of Mexico.
We'll put Antonio Banderas in the movie, because what's he doing these days? And
that's right. And
that guy was Mexican George Clooney for a minute. I don't know what happened to George Clooney either. Now that I think about
it. Yeah, they got old, I think. That's what happened.
They did, we did.
We all got old. We're all getting old. We're all gonna die, and we're all gonna turn into shriveled up mummies, depending on the weather conditions.
We're gonna wind up in El Museo de Momias because we couldn't pay our grave tax.
Oh, and so. There is some
I can understand a one-time burial tax for actually burying the damn thing.
Right.
Once a month?
Well, like I said, people were dying left and right due to the pandemic at the time, so it was a ludicrous... Not a ludicrous, it was a very profitable business, the whole burial scene. And they're gonna milk as much money as they can with all that extra land for burying people.
Graveyards are always very popular. People are always dying to get in.
Oh. Anyways, back to this film. So I'm pretty sure, like you were probably scratching your head thinking, if this movie is supposed to be like a three-way team up between Santo, Blue Demon, and Mil Máscaras, why does El Santo only show up at the very end? Well, here's the funny thing.
Why, yes, I did wonder that.
He wasn't originally supposed to be in this movie.
That explains it.
So, apparently, according to some facts I found out on the Spanish version of Wikipedia, one of the producers thought that this movie wasn't going to be successful had Santo not been in it. So he, at the last second, asked for Santo to be included in this movie. And so that's why he showed us up at the very, very end of the movie. And we also got some scenes involving him, his supposed ancestor fighting Satan. Although I think it's a neat enough inclusion, that sort of flashback. It was actually, of all of like the, as cheap as this movie is in terms of its production, like a lot of it kind of feels more like an episode out of Batman 66, if anything. But I do like some of the cinematic camera techniques, mainly the first time we see the mummies come to life, and there's this like very psychedelic music playing. There's these like distorted fish-eyed lenses, whereas the mummies are all sort of like waving their hands in front of the camera, going all woo. And there was also some nice cinematography, I feel, when Satan, he's walking into a modern-day wrestling ring, looking around, and he's having flashbacks, and that transitions into the flashback of him fighting El Santo's ancestor.
Right. You know, I compared this movie to a Nostalgia Critic movie earlier.
Uh-huh.
And really, Santo's role in this movie is what Santa Christ would do in a Nostalgia Critic movie or video.
Yeah.
He just shows up at the end, saves the day, and then leaves because he's fucking Santo Christ. And that's what he does.
Christ. Well, he pretty much is the Santo, given how massive of an icon he is in Mexico. He pretty much is Santa Christ.
He shows up and hands out flamethrowers. First of all, why does he have those?
Because Dylan, he's a hero. All heroes carry flamethrowers in their guns. That like when we were watching the movie, that was like my explanation for anything or any question Dylan had. Is like, why are they doing this? Why can they do this? Is like, they're heroes. They can just get away with it.
Spaceballs, the flamethrower.
They're popular with the kids.
The kids love this one.
Or like the most like interesting aspect of this movie is the fact that like not only are like Blue Demon, El Santo, and Mil Máscaras just like walking around in character, but it's like they just not only can they just walk around in like suits, in like sharply dressed suits, but they got the mask on. Sometimes they're just walking around bare chested with their capes and tights and boots and, you know, full gear, and like nobody bats an eye. It's like, hey, they're heroes. Of course, this is natural. It's a natural way of life for them.
It reminds me of in Batman Forever when you see Batman in the courtroom.
Right.
And he's just Batman. He's dressed as Batman. And everybody around him is wearing fucking suits and everything.
Mr. Blue Demon, if that is your real name, can you point to the person who you saw commit the crime? Si, senor, he did the action. He did the crime.
It was Satan.
It was Satan. I saw it with my own eyes, with me own ojos.
He was the ringleader.
Right. Yeah. So it's just like, again, I keep repeating this a lot, but it just adds to the charm of this movie, where this is just a complete fantasy world where the sort of like larger than life personas you normally see in the ring are like brought out into the real world, but like the rest of the world is just as crazy as the wrestlers themselves. And this is something that like could only that could have only happened between like the 50s, 60s, and 70s at this time, during this like glorious like roughly 3-decade period of cinema.
Well, it's one thing to play an over-the-top, like, larger-than-life character in the ring. Then when you put that character in a movie, I guess the thought is, like, the world around them needs to be equally over-the-top and larger-than-life, or else they're going to stick out like a sore thumb.
Right. And you know what? It's like, I'm not a big fan of the haunted world of El Superbeasto, but I think that in terms of like world building, they definitely get that sort of style across, just like heightened up to a even crazier degree due to the fact that it's animation, and they can pretty much go full ham on the sort of ridiculousness of this horror themed world.
Right.
And let's see, anything else to mention about this movie? Well, there are like occasional like scenes. I would say there are, I want to say 4 major wrestling scenes. There's like the scene with El Santo's ancestor and Satan. There is the first time we see Blue Demon and Mil Máscaras. It is a 2-on-2 match between them and the other 2 guys. And there's like also like a couple fights near the end.
We're not wearing masks.
Right. Not everyone wears masks, yes.
So not you don't have to have a mask to be a luchador?
Right, you don't need to wear a mask to be a luchador, but it definitely helps to wear a mask in order to build a character, especially if you want to hide your face and hide your public your private information and private life, that sort of thing. The mask definitely helps in sort of creating an alternate persona, kind of similar to what I would say Daft Punk does with their, helmet persona, robot personas.
I wonder if anybody ever figured out who Mil Máscaras was when he wasn't wearing the mask. It's like, hey, I don't know of any other 8-foot tall people in Mexico. You're him.
It's like Andre the Giant. It's like, hey, yeah. Are you Andre the Giant? I don't know who Andre is. You want a peanut?
No, I'm 3 children in a trench coat.
But yeah, at the very least, we do know a bit about Mil Máscaras' personal life. His real name, Aaron Rodriguez Arellano, and we know his birthday. We know that he has 2 brothers who were also wrestlers, and he has 2 nephews who are also wrestlers themselves. As for...
Did he actually have 1,000 masks, or was that an exaggeration?
I want to say that's an exaggeration, but given how long he's been wrestling, like, the dude's been wrestling since 1963. So apparently he started his career in 1963, but he was sort of like, his persona was built specifically for the movies, which then carried over back into his wrestling career. So he was like the first wrestler to be made for the movies in 1966, and so afterwards, given that, like, he's had that persona of Mil Máscaras from 1966 onwards to this very day. So after, like, I want to say 40, after like roughly 60? Yeah, about almost 60, roughly 60 years of wrestling, I want to say that he's probably got 1,000 masks at this point.
Sure.
Because that's another crazy thing. So, like, when the movie starts off, you see him with, like, his most iconic mask. But, like, randomly, he starts, like, changing masks, like, in between, like, scenes. So, like, the next time you see him, he's still wearing the mask, but then, like, the right next scene, he's wearing a completely different mask, with a different
mask,
a green mask, yeah. And then by the end of the movie, for a good chunk of the movie, he stops changing masks. Even during like major scenes, so it's like, I wonder why at this point he started to stick with the, like, that, I think it was like a pink and leopard print mask. No, it was like a pink and yellow mask with like leopard tights.
Yeah, I think it's because that's like in the 3rd act. I think it's because in universe there was no time that he could have changed his mask, because
right.
That's the part of the movie where they're busy running around,
being chased by police, and then eventually going after the mummies.
Right. So, like, I don't know why the movie would choose that point to make sense on, but that would be my theory.
Yeah. It would have been cool if, like, his mask acted like a mood ring. It just changes colors depending on the mood.
Right.
And let's see.
It's like a Rorschach mask. It just keeps changing shape and color and.
Right. Yeah. I do have several of his masks. I have the most popular one with the black and white one with the red M on the forehead. I've also, but any other, like, Mil Máscaras masks I have just follow that design, but switches up the color. Kind of similar, I would say, like Rey Mysterio kind of does the same thing as well, where he's got the same mask, but with different colors to fit the occasion.
Yeah, so does that other guy that I've mentioned, Sin Cara. I think that's a pretty common thing now. They'll have, like, variations on their normal outfit. It'll just be like a different color scheme, and then they'll have a different mask to match.
Right. But as for El Santo and Blue Demon, they've always had that iconic look for both of them. Blue Demon always fights with that same mask and same tights, and same goes for El Santo with his platinum silver-colored mask and tights. Yeah. Let's see, anything else? There is a bit of like lore they try to add for these characters. They gave, again, I haven't seen a lot of these movies before and since this movie, so I'm not sure how much like continuity there is between these movies. But I know this movie they gave him like an adopted son, Blue Demon. They gave him an adopted son, which, by the way, apparently he does have a real life adopted son who would go on to carry the name Blue Demon Jr. Yeah. Let's see. I mentioned before, Santo has like a partner in crime that he drives with when he's driving into town, and Mil Máscaras has a girlfriend, and there's also Pinguino, who unfortunately bites the dust halfway through the movie. I was like, no, Pinguino!
Here's something I should mention.
Sure.
Because it really stuck out to me.
Okay.
I have no idea what Blue Demon looks like under that mask, obviously.
Nobody does.
Nobody knows. But it seems to me that he had a really big mouth. Like, it was really wide. Like, it took up way more of his mask than it seems like the other two wrestlers. Like, their mouth holes weren't nearly as... Like, did you notice the same thing after I pointed out to you? He had, like...
Yeah, I did kind of notice that.
He's got, like, a big old frog mouth.
Yeah, like if you're looking up, if you look him up,
I don't know why that stuck out to. I guess because you can't see any of the other details of his face, so anything you can see sticks out more. You know.
Yeah, that is the thing. That is the case there. Yeah, I do definitely kind of see it in his mouth, and I think maybe it's possible that just like the space around his mouth is like much wider, so it just kind of makes his lips probably look bigger as a result.
That's not a criticism of the film.
That's just a criticism of his own physical appearance.
It's just an observation, a fun observation that I made. At the end of this video, I'm not going to go, Blue Demon's mouth was really wide. 2 stars. But just thought I'd mention it because it's something that stuck out to me during the watch. So.
Yeah. So, just looking up some other pictures that I can find of the two of them, and yeah, it once you point it out, it does become more apparent. The more pictures that I look up of him, that his lips do appear more prominent than either of the other two wrestlers here. I think this one definitely shows it right here.
He has a pretty wide mouth hole on his mask.
Yeah,
and it doesn't even look like it. Like goes the full length of his mouth. Like it looks like there's more mouth on either side.
I love how this is just the one thing you were fascinated with early on in the movie.
Well, it really jumped out of the screen. I mean, I was like, whoa!
His lips were like stretching out. His lips were essentially like the jaws the jawbones at the end of Jaws 3D.
Yeah, like he also has a pretty prominent nose, but like nothing too crazy.
Again,
that mouth.
Again, the mask itself, the way it's designed, does feature more of his nose than the other wrestlers.
Right. Maybe it's just a mask thing. Maybe there's just something about the way his mask is designed that makes him look so strange.
Unique, we'll say.
Yeah. But yeah. So that was an observation.
Right. So, anything else about this movie that you would like to bring up before we end things?
No, the mouth was pretty much it. That was the main takeaway. The main mummy was kind of cool.
Yeah. I thought he had a decent design. The little like eyeball kind of falling out of its eye socket, as cheap as the makeup was, the design and the look itself was pretty ambitious, I'd say, or pretty interesting. And his motivation
the mummies overall did look pretty good. I mean, you can tell, like, oh yeah, those are like they're not the most sophisticated effects in the world.
No, they just had enough makeup budget they had enough budget for the film for the makeup and just for some like old wet tattered clothing.
Yeah, there's one scene where Pinguino hallucinates being attacked by the mummies, and in that there's like there's this one really creepy mummy who like he was
had like a more Skeletor looking face.
Yeah, he had really big buggy eyes and like very prominent teeth, and he kept opening and closing his mouth and like gnashing his teeth. And
I remember that.
That was actually like a pretty creepy image, and there's not like a whole lot of like sound design behind it, so it's like him silently doing that, and it is kind of unsettling.
Right.
It also helps the makeup, the fact that these were not the greatest cameras in the world either. I mean,
very true. Yes.
The image quality is fine.
Again, you got to remember
1971,
72. This is 1972 in Mexican cinema. Mexico never really had much of a budget back then, nor arguably still now. Although you know what? No. I stand corrected. Pan's Labyrinth was beautiful.
I don't know what the Mexican equivalent to filmed on a potato would be. Filmed on a tortilla. I don't know. But film with a burrito, but
with the mic, with the boom mic.
It's a little cloudy.
I would say like the cheapest moments, like the most like the closest it got to like a shot on video sort of style was like earlier I wanted to bring this up where there were moments in the movie where you can tell that they were kind of padding for time, and especially like at the very beginning of the movie, there are these like very long extended shots of the city of Guanajuato, where it's just like the opening credits last for a pretty long time before we get to the tourists in the cemetery.
It's basically a travel ad for the first couple minutes. Come visit scenic Guanajuato. There's some similar stuff in like Reptilicus, where it's like and they're in whatever city that is at the end, and it's like, look at all these landmarks. And you're like, can we get back to the creature?
Right.
But the landmarks.
So like I would say like beyond the opening of the movie, it doesn't get like that egregious once the plot got going.
Yeah, no. There was never a moment in the middle of the movie where Blue Demon stops and turns to No Mascaras and says, "Oh, there's the famous fucking church over there."
Hold on. I think there was one where it's like, if you remember, the mummies, when they were trying to frame Blue Demon, they threw like a rock with a message through like the police window, and it's like, meet us at this very specific church to find the person who killed these people, and then that's where they end up like luring Blue Demon there just so he can be at the wrong place at the wrong time to be chased by the police. So technically, at the very, there is like some sort of real world location, but at least it kind of serves a purpose for the film.
Oh, you're right. I retract everything that I said. All the praise. 2 stars. But yeah, it only feels like a travel ad for the first couple minutes.
Right. Anyways, let's see here. I do have some bits of trivia that I do want to share with you about the wrestlers. I remember I already mentioned that Mil Mascaras was like the youngest of these guys. He has like a good 20 years on them, being born in 42, whereas the others were born in 22 and 17 respectively. And so around this time, he was probably in his 30s, whereas like Blue Demon and El Santo, they were around their 50s during the time this movie was made.
Pushing 60 for the guy who was born in 1917. I mean, wow.
Yeah, that's very true. Yeah. Let's see. He was definitely the heavyweight champion, which was mostly a weight division that was dominated by foreigners mostly at the time, because again, Mexicans aren't big people to begin with, so it was rare to actually find a Mexican wrestler within the lucha libre heavyweight division. Let's see. Like I mentioned, he was actually the first foreign wrestler in America to play in a no-heel role. So, like, in America, the good guys are considered heels, and what were the bad guys considered?
Heels and faces.
Right. In Lucha Libre, the good guys are referred to as técnicos, and the bad guys are referred to as rudos. So I guess it was a thing for like foreign wrestlers to be considered faces or the bad guys. It was common for foreign wrestlers to be heels or the bad guys in American wrestling, but Mil Máscaras sort of broke the mold with that. He was inducted into he was also one of the first people to introduce several wrestling moves, luchador-style wrestling moves in Japanese wrestling. He was inducted into the Wrestling Hall of Fame in 2010. He was inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame in 2012. And and everything else I mentioned about Mil Máscaras I mentioned before. As for Blue Demon, he was born in 1922. He died at the age of 78 in 2000. He started out in 1948, started out as a rudo, and then turned into a technical when, in 1952, his partner, Black Shadow, was defeated and unmasked by El Santo, which started the lifelong in-ring or in-persona rivalry between Blue Demon and El Santo, which isn't really touched upon here in the movie.
No, you would think they would bring that up.
Yeah, I think the closest
when Santo shows up, you'd think him and Blue Demon would look at each other like, yeah, next time, pal.
Yeah. I think
if these mummies weren't here, ooh.
Yeah. I think like the closest they got to depicting their rivalry was, I believe there was a line where Mil Máscaras suggested like waiting for Santo to arrive so that they can take care of the mummies together, but Blue Demon is like, we can do it without Santo. It's just you and me, pal. But yeah, even then, like, they've had that rivalry, so it's essentially with Blue Demon starting out as a bad guy and turning into a good guy with a rivalry with Santo. Blue Demon is essentially the Vegeta to Santo's Goku. Let's see. Their sons eventually...
Now you're putting this in terms I can understand.
Let's see. Blue Demon...
10-4.
Blue Demon, his son continued the rivalry long after their dad's death. Let's see. Blue Demon retired in 1989 at 67, and Blue Demon Jr. Took over I guess he was born in 1966 and is still wrestling to this day. Blue Demon Jr. is currently 53 years old, so he's roughly the same age his dad was during this film. And he has an adopted son. Let's see. Oh, no, sorry. Blue Demon Jr. was an adopted son, as I mentioned before. His real name was never revealed, unlike Blue Demon. And let's see. And he also had a cameo in Mucha Lucha. And apparently, I just found out now that Blue Demon Jr. is getting a TV show on, I guess, the Mexican Disney Channel.
Isn't it interesting how... Mm-hmm. Wrestling, both Mexican and American, seems to be one of those rare sports that you can continue to play well into your fucking 60s and 70s.
Yeah, I was very surprised by that. Yeah, I guess mostly because a lot of it involves like sort of it's a lot of it is show, but it's I won't ever deny that it's not a physically demanding sport, but I guess it's like
it's not 100% fake, but it's definitely, it's not full out.
There's a lot of theatrics involved, and so I guess that allows these wrestlers to continue on into their 50s and 60s and 70s.
Right, because you look at like real like UFC fighters, they don't last that long.
No. And let's see, finally I mentioned, going into talking about El Santo, he was born in 1917, died in 1984, died at the age of 66 from a heart attack, although he retired the previous 2 years prior at 65 in 1982. In 1952, he had a comic book. He appeared in 52 Lucha Libre films. Let's see, I previously mentioned that the 1962 film Santo vs. the Vampire Women appeared on MST3K. His son, his son took over as El Hijo del Santo, and his grandson, who is not the son of El Hijo del Santo, but rather he is the son of another son who did not become a wrestler. He became a wrestler as well, named Axel. Let's see. When Santo died, he had one of the largest funerals in Mexican history. And I previously mentioned that he appeared in his own cartoon. He had a cameo, and he had cameos in both the Batman 66 comic and the 2017 Pixar Disney film Coco.
And he was definitely rich enough to afford his fucking grave.
Right. He never had to deal with any tax, any burial tax. So, I believe that is about it when it comes to our look at Las Momias de Guanajuato, as well as our look at the culture of lucha libre, both in the ring and the sort of cultural impact it had surrounding it. So yeah, what are your overall thoughts on the film and everything we have talked about this evening, Dylan? And do you fully endorse Las Momias de Guanajuato?
This has been most educational. Yeah, I mean, it's fucking bananas. If you enjoy, weird out there stuff like we do, if you're into sort of, horror and stuff like that, and I think that this is not a bad. If you heard me, if you heard me make that Gamera versus Zigra comparison, and you went, "Oh, I love Gamera versus Zigra," watch this movie. I think you'll get a lot out of it. And if you don't mind subtitles, so
right.
Yeah, absolutely, I would definitely give this a fully endorsed. I don't think it would be everybody's cup of tea, but I think for folks like us,
mm-hmm.
this is a pretty good time. So yeah.
Awesome. Thank you very much. I'm glad you enjoyed this little peek into my own little slice of cultural heritage, Dylan.
Indeed.
And I would also like to mention that it is available on. You can find copies of it available on YouTube with no subtitles. The version we saw was actually on the, what's it called, archive or internetarchive.org. So that one has full English subtitles, and so Internet Archive or like archive.org. That's like probably the best version to watch the Mummies of Guanajuato with full translated, comprehensible English subtitles. The movie still doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but at the very least, it does provide enough context for you to fully enjoy a film that we fully endorse. So, what
I would also like to mention that in the scene where we're first introduced to Blue Demon and Mil Mascarasa, there's some very good wrestling choreography involved in that scene. So if you're into that sort of thing, there's another plus.
Absolutely, yes. So it's like, if you're a fan of like sports movies, like the Rocky films, where you can enjoy some good old choreographed sporting events, you definitely get a lot of that in the Mummies of Guanajuato as well.
If you've ever been watching a sports movie like Miracle or something like that, you thought, what would make this movie better? Fucking zombie invasion. Then this it's the movie for you.
Absolutely. So, what are we going to talk about next time, Dylan?
Yes, okay, we're technically cheating a little bit next week. Because technically Andres has seen this once before. However, it was in school and his memories of it are vague to say the least.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm gonna say fuck it, and we're gonna cover it anyway, because I think that there is a very interesting conversation to be had. So what we are going to be covering next week is the 1997 TV movie adaptation of Homer's The Odyssey, starring Armando Sante in the role of Odysseus. It's a TV miniseries, but it's just 2 parts, and so you watch it together as one 3-hour movie. So we'll be covering that. So if you're a fan of Greek mythology, it's going to be a fun time.
Oh boy!
So tune in for that if you wanna.
I think that's slowly becoming your catchphrase now. Tune in for that if you wanna.
If you're into that sort of thing, if they don't hit each other too hard.
And so, thank you very much, everybody. Tune in next time when we'll be talking about the TV movie adaptation of The Odyssey. So until next time, I have been Andres Perez, aka Kaiju Noir.
And I have been Super DM64.
And until next time, everybody, take care.